Good evening. This evening we're going to continue with our study on Doctrines of Demons. This is part five. I would ask you to bear with me tonight. I've been having bad allergies. I'm going to try to get through this without too much coughing or sneezing or whatever, but I do ask your patience on that. We're going to begin tonight in the book of Romans, chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. They hold down or they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So, as we continue this journey of looking at the doctrines of demons, which the powers of darkness use to oppress mankind, we're going to take a look at some of their tools. Now, previously, we looked at Jonah and the obligation that you're under when God tells you to do something. Today, we're going to actually talk about James Bond briefly. And yes, I'm serious about that, and you'll understand why in just a minute. So, a while back, I was on social media, and there was a link for a discussion which it thought that I might be interested in, and it was about James Bond books. Now, honestly, I don't know why I received that link. I have absolutely zero interest in James Bond books, but the title of the thread caught my eye. So I opened the link and I thought that maybe one of my friends might be a part of the discussion. No one with whom I'm linked or whom I'm associated was part of it. However, like I said, the title of it caught my eye. So, to make a long story short, the author's family no longer holds a right to his books, but they do keep an eye on them because that is his legacy. So, one of his family members had come to this group to tell them something that they needed to be aware of. The company that now owns the rights to the books had rewritten some of the troubling passages, made it more politically correct, without telling anybody. Now, if someone bought a book, they're not going to get the original, but a modified version of it. Now, those that were in the group, they then discovered that the company had also modified the electronic versions of the books and had gone so far as modifying the books that were already on the members' electronic devices, which they had purchased years earlier. So this is why I think I was shown that discussion. If they, and this is the generic they at this point, this particular case is the company, but if it's the powers, if they're going to censor or alter something that's as inconsequential as a James Bond novel, what are they going to do to theological texts that may have profound implications on the world and on their power? Now, I'm fond of my e-reader. I've had one for years, and once I read a 1,000-page book on it that weighed 8.5 pounds, and that's when it became my preference because that was a pretty heavy book, and this was 4 or 5 ounces. So at that point, I sold most of my physical books except for the ones that were not available electronically. After this discussion that I read, I've since repurchased the important ones. So, what happens if they modify a book that you have and you have no way to know what it should be? They could change a phrase in the Bible to make abomination seem okay. Perhaps they could change the definition in a dictionary. But this is our subject for tonight. We're looking at censorship, misinformation, and disinformation. These are all tools that are used by those who want power. For those who are reasonably aware of history, you already know that censorship and tyrannical dictatorships happened all the time. The Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Cuba, North Korea, things like that. Sometimes censorship may be necessary, such as wartime secrets, but overall, free speech is conducive to a healthy society. Now, in the Bible, there's nothing said directly in favor of free speech. There's also nothing said in opposition to it. However, we are commanded to speak the truth. We're forbidden to lie. We are to obey legitimate government authorities unless that contradicts the will of God. And the powers of darkness know this, so they must silence the truth. What makes this difficult is that sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between the truth and the lie. And that's why we're commanded to study and to learn so that we will not be deceived. We know that many are going to be deceived. Many are deceived today. And make no mistake about it, although many shout separation of church and state from the rooftops, those dark powers have no problem combining church and state, as well as attacking from whatever angle they can. They will do so subtly if they can, most of the time they're not even going to lie when the truth works just as well. Now, in the United States, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution spells out that the right to free speech is not to be infringed. So, far too many people think that it's okay to infringe if the speech is offensive or hateful or whatever. Well, that's the kind of speech that needs to be protected. Popular speech doesn't need protection. However, there are too many people who abuse that right through cursing, lying, pornography, and things such as that. But that all goes along with it. Now, while the freedom of speech is not explicitly in the Bible, of course, neither is the rapture nor the Trinity, that both are present. The Bible is where the framers of the United States Constitution guide the ideas that are written into the Constitution and the first 10 amendments. Now, although the Bible does not explicitly declare that people should have freedom of speech, it does lay out guidance for what we should and should not say. From the beginning, man has had free will. When the serpent deceived Eve in the Garden of Eden, she and Adam had a responsibility to obey God. And ever since then, there have been those who wanted to oppress others. When we obey the biblical guidelines, that oppression can't happen. Sinful behavior leads to bondage, and obedience leads to freedom. It's as simple as that. The Bible discourages cursing, mendacity, vulgarity, lying, slander, oppressive speech that just simply tears down others. And in the world today, that seems to be the majority of what we see. Politicians will lie, and when the lies are exposed, people don't care as long as they're getting their bread in circuses. You can rarely watch movies or TV without explicit language or explicit situations. And if you do find a show that's okay, the advertising is disgusting. And this is all a twisting of reality. Now, one of the products of the TV generation, by and large, is that they no longer have the ability to think logically and in depth. They tend to be able to think in sound bites because that's been their entire lives. What can they see between commercial breaks? What story can be developed and finished in half an hour? We're going to look at that more later, but that's the kind of people we're trying to communicate with. In Ephesians chapter 4, verses 15 and verses 29, but speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. Let no corrupt excuse me, let no corrupt communication or corrupting talk proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. And then First Chronicles chapter 16, verses 23 through 31. Sing unto the Lord, all the earth. Show forth from day to day his salvation. Declare his glory among the heathen, his marvelous works among all nations. For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He also is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Glory and honor are in his presence, strength and gladness are his place. Give unto the Lord, ye kindreds of people, give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Bring an offering and come before him. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Fear before him all the earth. The world also shall be stable, that it be not moved. Let the heavens be glad, and let the earth rejoice, and let men say among the nations, the Lord reigneth. So the Bible encourages us to speak the truth and to build others up. And that includes speaking the truth about sin and the consequences of it. Now, the prophets were certainly not prone to teaching that it's all good whatever you do because God loves you. God does love you, but it's not okay whatever you're doing. But we are to use our mouths to praise and worship God as well. We're clearly taught to speak up for what is right. When you read the story of Esther, she went before the king to request him to spare her people. And since he had not summoned her, he could have had her executed. This is a little bit more severe than walking in on somebody accidentally. Mordecai, who was her cousin, encouraged her to do this. And just like Jonah, she was expected to do what was not what she really wanted to do. Esther chapter 4, verse 14. This is out of the ESV. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So you're to be expected to speak, and the enemy is going to try to silence you. And if you cannot be silenced, then they're going to try to discredit your message. As we've seen, as believers, we are dual citizens. It is not a left right paradigm, it's an up down paradigm. We're citizens of heaven, we're citizens of the earth, and we have obligations in both. But we don't need to establish a theocracy. Jesus is going to do that one day. But neither do we need to abandon promoting morality and opposing corruption and oppression. Now, this does not apply only in the political world, but in the religious world as well. So, both within the church and outside the church. We're going to read a lengthy passage here. We're going to read the entire chapter 36 of the book of Jeremiah. In the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Take a scroll and write on it all the words that I have spoken to you against Israel and Judah and all the nations, from the day I spoke to you, from the days of Josiah until today. It may be that the house of Judah will hear all the disaster that I intend to do to them, so that everyone may turn from his evil way, and that I may forgive their iniquity and their sin. Then Jeremiah called Baruch, the son of Neriah, and Baruch wrote on a scroll at the dictation of Jeremiah all the words of the Lord that he had spoken to him. And Jeremiah ordered Baruch, saying, I am banned from going to the house of the Lord. So you are to go, and on the day of fasting, in the hearing of all the people in the Lord's house, you shall read the words of the Lord from the scroll that you have written at my dictation. You shall read them also in the hearing of all the men of Judah who come out of their cities. It may be that their plea for mercy will come before the Lord, and that everyone will turn from his evil way, for great is the anger and wrath that the Lord has pronounced against his people. And Baruch, the son of Neriah, did all that Jeremiah the prophet ordered him about reading from the scroll the words of the Lord in the Lord's house. In the 5th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, in the 9th month, all the people in Jerusalem and all the people who came from the cities of Judah to Jerusalem proclaimed a fast before the Lord. Then, in the hearing of all the people, Baruch read the words of Jeremiah from the scroll in the house of the Lord in the chamber of Gemariah, the son of Shaphan, the secretary, which was in the upper court at the entry of the new gate of the Lord's house. When Micaiah, the son of Gemariah, son of Shaphan, heard all the words of the Lord from the scroll, he went down to the king's house, into the secretary's chamber, and all the officials were sitting there. Elishama the secretary, Delaiah the son of Shemaiah, Elnathan the son of Achbor, Gemariah the son of Shaphan, Zedekiah the son of Hananiah, and all the officials. And Micaiah told them all the words that he had heard when Baruch read the scroll in the hearing of the people. Then all the officials sent Jehudi the son of Nethaniah, son of Shelemiah, son of Cushi, to say to Baruch, take in your hand the scroll that you read in the hearing of the people and come. So Baruch, the son of Neriah, took the scroll in his hand and came to them, and they said to him, sit down and read it. So Baruch read it to them. When they had when they heard all the words, they turned one to another in fear, and they said to Baruch, we must report all these words to the king. Then they asked Baruch, tell us, please, how did you write all these words? Was it at his dictation? Baruch answered to them, he dictated all these words to me while I wrote them with ink on the scroll. Then the official said to Baruch, go and hide, you and Jeremiah, and let no one know where you are. So they went into the court to the king, having put the scroll in the chamber of Elishama the secretary, and they reported all the words to the king. Then the king sent Jehudi to get the scroll, and he took it from the chamber of Elishama the secretary. And Jehudi read it to the king and all the officials who stood beside the king. It was the 9th month, and the king was sitting in the winter house, and there was a fire burning in the fire pot before him. As Jehudi read 3 or 4 columns, the king would cut them off with a knife, and throw them into the fire in the fire pot until the entire scroll was consumed in the fire that was in the fire pot. Yet neither the king nor any of his servants who heard all these words was afraid, nor did they tear their garments. Even when Elnathan and Deliah and Gemariah urged the king not to burn the scroll, he would not listen to them. I'm sorry. And the king commanded Jeremiel, the king's son, and Seraiah, the son of Ezrael, and Shelemiah, the son of Abdil, to seize Baruch the secretary and Jeremiah the prophet. But the Lord hid them. Now, after the king had burned the scroll with the words that Baruch wrote at Jeremiah's dictation, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. Take another scroll and write on it all the former words that were in the first scroll, which Jehoiakim the king of Judah has burned. And concerning Jehoiakim, king of Judah, you shall say, Thus says the Lord, you have burned this scroll, saying, Why have you written in it that the king of Babylon will certainly come and destroy this land and will cut off from it man and beast? Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning Jehoiakim, king of Judah, he shall have none to sit on the throne of David, and his dead body shall be cast out to the heat by day and the frost by night. And I will punish him and his offspring and his servants for their iniquity. I will bring upon them and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem and upon the people of Judah all the disaster that I have pronounced against them, but they would not hear. Then Jeremiah took another scroll and gave it to Baruch the scribe, the son of Neriah, who wrote on it, at the dictation of Jeremiah, all the words of the scroll that Jehoiakim, king of Judah, had burned in the fire, and many similar words were added to them. So in this passage, there is a lot to unpack. The religious officials knew what was right and they knew what was wrong, but they were scared for their jobs or perhaps their lives, so they did nothing. And for those who say the Lord will protect me miraculously, maybe. Sometimes he works that way. Other times he tells you to run and hide. That's why it's important to be obedient because nothing is a one size fits all solution. There's a lot to unpack, but for right now, we need to notice that Jeremiah spoke what was right, even though it put him in fear for his life, and the political leader, the king, censored his words that God had told him to share, and they were destroyed for that. Now we're looking at some of the tools that they use, specifically censorship, misinformation, and disinformation. Censorship is the suppressing or prohibition of speech. Misinformation is incorrect information that's unintentionally spread, and disinformation is incorrect information that's intentionally spread. All three are used in both the secular and the religious world. The two are not really separable. The religious world and the secular world cannot be separated. We live in both. Now, the word religion in English comes from the Anglo-French about the 12th century, but prior to that came from words that had implications of obligation and repetition. It did not denote a specific religion or sect, but to go through and go over again. In other words, it is the outer forms and not the inner. A morally positive religion is praised, and a false religion is condemned in the Bible. To paraphrase Hugh Latimer, religion has to do with righteousness, justice, and well doing by the standards of that particular religion. A religious a religious Jew is one who observes the rules. In other words, he's gone over them and he considers it an obligation to obey the law. A non-religious Jew would be one who neglects the rules. So it's a choice, it's reckoning, it's pain, it's not easy, it's election, it's choosing, it's other shades of meaning and idea. That's what religion is on the outside. So, with this in mind, the powers of darkness blur the distinction between the secular and the religious by calling it something else, whether humanism, science, or any other belief that can be construed as a religious observance. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, Be not deceived. Evil communication or bad company corrupts good manners, it corrupts good morals. Does this mean that you need to avoid everybody? No. How are you going to witness to somebody that you completely avoid? However, you need to not come under the influence of bad company. Basically, Unchecked, harmful speech can destroy societal values and ethics, especially if there's not an offsetting influence. Just because you're free to say something does not mean that you're free from the consequences of saying it. And just because you can say it doesn't mean you should. You have to think about your words, but if God tells you to say it, you better say it. However, the enemy is going to use this as an excuse for censorship. They'll say, oh, that's hate speech. Who determines what hate is? Religion is harmful for children, especially Christianity, because it will hurt their self esteem. But our societies are going to mutilate them and destroy their lives. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 2, and many shall follow their pernicious ways. They're going to follow their sensuality, their debauched lifestyles, by reason of whom the way of the truth shall be evil spoken of. When you see the expression the truth, this is a message about the coming kingdom. This concept is hated both within and without the church. It removes their tyranny. They have no power with this doctrine. This passage shows the danger of false teaching. False teaching will lead many astray and is going to cause the truth to be blasphemed. Say it's all good. Just do whatever you want. Don't listen to them. They don't want you to have any fun at all. After all, if God thought it was a sin, you wouldn't want to do it. That's all just lies. And that's what they tell people, and that's what people want to believe. In Titus chapter 1, verses 10 and 11, for there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake. As we said before, follow the money. We are to confront teachers who deceive, at least to an extent. You don't want to be detrimental, but this doesn't necessarily include those with whom we have a disagreement about something, but it's those who are deceiving intentionally, and that is usually for money or power, or both. We're to practice censorship when it comes to stopping deceit, slander, and manipulation. It's about greed. There is a reason the biblical model is the home church. Large congregations are not condemned, but the model is small. When you have a large congregation with a building, a gymnasium, a fleet of vans, a campground out by the lake, and other things such as that, some people might be tempted to ignore false teaching and avoid losing out on all the goodies. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But the question needs to be asked, what is their purpose and what is their importance? Do you have a gym to bring the world into the church? Or is it so members can have fellowship? Would you be willing to walk away if needed to? After all, the only real solution that we're given in the Bible for doctrinal differences is to break fellowship and leave. That is our only obligation. Now, our freedom of speech should be used for freedom in Christ. We should be encouraging growth in one another. We should not be using it to coerce others or persecute them. We should not manipulate truth in order to get our way in the congregation. We have to be honest. In 1 Peter 2:15, for so is the will of God, that with well doing or doing right, you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. Righteous behavior will discredit falsehood without coercion. That's why righteous behavior must be stopped or spoken evil of by those who want power. If they want power, they have to stop righteousness. Mark chapter 4, verse 19. And the cares of this world, and the cares of this age, and the deceitfulness of riches, and the lusts or desires of other things entering in, choke the word. This is the Logos, but it chokes the word and it becomes unfruitful. Satan is going to attack you, body, soul, and spirit. And if you give in, you will discredit yourself and you will discredit the Logos. 1 Corinthians 10:29. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other. For why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? And then 2 Corinthians 10:5. casting down imagination and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and brings into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. This is our framework. Our framework is self control, but we're also commanded to do. But we are not to do under our own authority, but under God's authority. We need to speak the truth. And once again, this is not a call to go out and get yourself fired from your job tomorrow, but don't actively participate in the lie. We are prohibited from censoring except for deceit and harm. We're warned against misinformation and we're commanded to not spread misinformation. That's the way to money and power. But we are commanded to avoid those things. The powers of darkness embrace those things. If they can silence the people in general, they can silence the church, unless you understand the danger and stand up to it. Frederick Douglass said that to suppress free speech is a double wrong. It violates the right of the hearer as well as those of the speaker. It is just as criminal to rob a man of his right to speak and hear as it would be to rob him of his money. And then Benjamin Franklin, who was writing A Silence Do Good, said, in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech. It was once understood that free speech is a bedrock for a free society, and this is the only way to a just and a righteous society. Today, even so called free nations are trying their best to destroy the ability to speak freely. Any destruction of liberty is always presented to be for the greater good, but it never is. They will tell you that they're simply protecting you. And if speech can be controlled, you will not be led astray by misinformation. Also, people will no longer be harmed by the so called hate speech. After all, words are equal to action, right? That's a lie. That's what they tell you, but that's a lie. There have always been limits to free speech. For example, if you're a property owner, you can control what is permitted to be said on your property, and you can remove anyone who violates that. Today, the government even prevents you from speaking freely in your own home. The example in Scotland of the abortion safety zones. You can even have a prayer meeting in your house or hang a Bible verse up. And they give others the right to occupy your property, such as squatters, and they let people run rampant. And that's not good. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. God warned us that these days were coming, but the powers of darkness deceive most people. You're not permitted to threaten other people or their property or conspire to commit a crime or incite violence. Those are limits to free speech. You can't threaten people. However, today it's acceptable if you're the right person or group. You can loot and burn and riot, and it's called a peaceful protest. While the wrong group can pray silently outside an abortion clinic and they can get time in prison. And also, as discussed earlier, you can't commit libel or slander or falsely advertise or things like that. So there are limits, but those limits harm others. But that's not what's being done today. Today, they want to censor and they want to criminalize so called hate speech. They want to criminalize what they consider to be misinformation and disinformation. And you may ask, well, what's so bad about that? Well, let's take a look at that. John Stuart Mill said, the opinion which it is attempted to suppress by authority may possibly be true. Those who desire to suppress it, of course, deny its truth, but they're not infallible. They have no authority to decide the question for all mankind and exclude every other person from the means of judging. If someone is to be charged with spreading false ideas, someone has to determine what is true. Government censorship, whether secular government or church government, requires a regulatory body that distinguishes between truth and lies. So who decides? Politicians and bureaucrats? Experts? There are a few ideas that all experts agree on. Therefore, politicians will determine which experts are truly experts. Perhaps there's a bidding process for that. Follow the money. While experts rarely agree, almost all experts are corruptible. Sex, money, power. If somebody is granted the authority to determine truth for a society, what happens when they're corrupted? And I have even, on social media, I have had posts that were hit by experts that were covered up with a warning. And when you look at it, it says, well, this statement is true, but it can mislead someone. How can the truth mislead? Who are these experts? Who decides? However, even if all the politicians and experts remain pure, they is still not suited to determine if something is true or not. Experts in some field will always see the solution in their field. Climate science is an example of that. Many experts are biologists, geologists, etc., and they may be brilliant in their own fields, but when they get outside their own field, what then? It's it is often the outsider who's the one who discovers new truths. Some experts can't see anything outside their specialty, and others can. So who decides? Truth is not discovered by decree unless that decree is from God Himself. Truth is found through free exchange of ideas, in which some ideas are kept and others are discarded. False ideas can force others to clarify their own ideas. Carl Sagan once said, there are many hypotheses in science which are wrong. That's all right. It's the aperture to finding out what's right. Science is a self correcting process. To be accepted, new ideas must survive the most rigorous standards of evidence and scrutiny. The worst aspect of the Velikovsky affair is not that many of his ideas were wrong or silly or in gross contradiction to the facts. Rather, the worst aspect is that some scientists attempted to suppress his ideas. The suppression of uncomfortable ideas may be common in religion or politics, but it is not the path to knowledge, and there's no place for it in the endeavor of science. We do not know beforehand where fundamental insights will arise from about our mysterious and lovely solar system. And the history of our study of the solar system shows clearly that accepted and conventional ideas are often wrong and that fundamental insights can arise from the most unexpected sources. Now, contrary to popular belief, Carl Sagan was not an atheist. I don't know what he was. He was not a Christian, or at least he never stated so if he was, but he did believe in the spiritual world. However, as a scientist, he understood that there's no such thing as settled science. Velikovsky, to whom he refers, is Immanuel Velikovsky. This man was a physician, he was a psychoanalyst, and he promoted theories about the solar system that were contrary to the settled science of the time. However, he got his ideas from word mythologies and presented them as ideas, not as facts. But the scientific establishment refused to debate him, which discredited him. And in the long run, it turns out that many of his theories were correct, but the censorship was the real discredit to the world. And I once saw a book that was written by scientists who disagreed with his theories, but they showed why his theories could actually be correct. They were honest about it. So when the powers of darkness censor and shut down any discussion of something, it may be perhaps that that's the very time that we should be paying attention. I will sometimes do a search for a subject, and every hit will talk about the discredited person or the discredited idea, which turns out to be correct years or sometimes even months in the future. Conspiracy theories, which we're going to look at in the coming weeks, will often be history after just a few decades, or sometimes just a few months, as we've seen in the last few years. So when a bureaucracy and its experts decide what is true and what is not true, it stunts the intellectual development of the world. If you can't challenge ideas, you can't create new ideas and discover truths. Not only do false ideas help us discover truth, sometimes they turn out to not be false. Now, permitting the bureaucracy to censor or even make criminal the expression of what they determine as disinformation is that it keeps the population in an infantile state. Our education system, at least in the United States, no longer teaches, it trains. And you can train a pigeon. No longer are our young people capable of thinking critically. They no longer even question if they should think critically. They're too emotionally immature to even make judgments. 100 years ago, we had 14-year-olds who were ready for marriage and to take on the world. And today we have 40-year-olds who still live in the basement of their parents. They're told what to believe, they're told what is right, they're told what was wrong, and they're told what cannot be said, and they believe it all. And they're just like automatons that will be outraged at anything that is outside of the new normal. And brothers and sisters, that new normal does not include faithful believers. You will be outside the norm and they will report you. Hebrews chapter 5, verses 13 through 14. For everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But strong meat belongs to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. So, just like every other passage that has a spiritual application, the underlying truth also applies to the surface meaning. Not only are those within the church not prepared for strong meat, our society is full of mental babies. Another quote from Frederick Douglass: liberty is meaningless where the right to utter one's thoughts and opinion has ceased to exist. That of all rights is the dread of tyrants. It is the right which they first of all strike down. They know its power. Tyrants in the secular world and in the church both. In the government, the tyrants are controlled by the powers of darkness, and we, the faithful believers, we have been charged with telling the truth, and those powers understand that that must be stopped. If your speech is not aligned with the ideology of the ruling powers, then they're going to declare that it's disinformation or at least misinformation. When a government has the power to determine what is and is not true, it can get the population to act in ways desired by the elites and they can stop any dissent. No force is necessary. Mass psychosis, which we're going to look at next week. And it doesn't matter if the bureaucracy uses censorship to promote what it actually thinks is good for society. It's not good for them to promote it. It's totalitarian. It's an act that puts more power in the hands of the powers of darkness. Censorship is used to divide a society. Some groups are protected from any criticism by the government, and then there are those who are persecuted by the government. The privileged treatment creates animosity, and they're then targeted for what many consider to be unfair treatment, and it's going to eventually spread over into physical action. When governments, both secular and religious governments, when they censor misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, we're headed down a slippery slope. If the society accepts that these things should be censored, why stop there? How about punishing thoughts? After all, wrong thoughts lead to wrong words and actions, right? All we have to do is figure out what individuals are thinking wrongly, and then we can re educate them before they cause problems. And if they resist re education, we can imprison them or we can eliminate them entirely. If we as Christians do what we are called to do, then we're going to speak up. As a group, as a group, we can avoid people and businesses who are complicit in government censorship. We know that there is a coming man of sin who's going to use these conditions to persecute faithful believers and to mislead and deceive untold millions. But now is the time to speak up. And where does it start? It starts in our homes. It starts in our communities. It starts in our churches. It starts within our circle of friends and acquaintances. But preacher, surely the churches aren't the problem. Brother, that's where the problem starts. Our Christian institutions have censored the truth. They've silenced dissent. They've persecuted the faithful so they can maintain power. Not the individuals within these organizations, but there are obviously millions of individuals who are faithful believers, even in corrupt organizations. But most people are not aware of the corruption. Some of the corruption is you must use our translation or you're not a true Christian. You must believe exactly as we believe, or else. What I heard recently, show me your pay stub. They wanted to know if you were giving enough to them. But we're going to look at all of that next week. This is all intertwined. The secular and the religious cannot be separated. And we're going to look at the religious part of it starting next week. But history has taught us what happens when good people are silent. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, this is a paraphrase, if we don't speak up, millions and millions will die for no good reason, and it will begin any night, maybe tonight. Are you prepared for what's coming? If you're prepared, are you preparing others? Why are we not prepared? How did we get in this position? It was no accident. Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and against the worldly governors, the princes of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness which are in the heavenlies. As believers, we should not be surprised by what's happening. We know that it's spiritual, we know that it's demonic, and we know that it's returning with a vengeance. The world is blind, the church is blind. And let us pray that the Lord will restore sight to the blind. And if you're still with me right now, I thank you for putting up. I do apologize for the coughing, but this is about half of what this message is going to be on the censorship. We're going to be looking at the religious aspect next week, and I hope each and every one of you are there. And in the meantime, just pray that the Lord will restore sight to the blind.